So I'm curious, Model UN, and what is everybody looking forward to in Model UN? What do you hope to get out of Model UN? Has anybody chosen sort of a country or a region or an issue that they really want to learn about? I want to be as a kid. I wanted to be a kid as a kid. I liked being a kid. I think I always liked the idea of traveling and going around and discovering the world, and I liked foreign languages a lot. And so I knew I wanted to do something international, but I didn't know quite what I wanted to do yet that was international. But I knew I wanted to move around. Actually, I never wanted to be an ambassador. I liked doing the other work. Like when you're an ambassador, you're sort of like the head honcho, right? You're like the superintendent of the school system. And I liked being a teacher, and I liked being doing other sorts of things. But I really wanted to do those things personally myself. So when they offered me the chance to be an ambassador, I said yes, because obviously it's kind of a cool title, right? Not everybody gets to say they're an ambassador. So I took the opportunity, and I enjoyed doing it and helping everybody else do their jobs. But I must admit that actually doing the real day-to-day work was maybe a little more fun. My 12-year-old self, to be very honest, the biggest surprise my 12-year-old self would have would be the fact that I'm living in Texas. I come from a small town in Maine, and my whole family came from Maine, and we never left Maine. I think otherwise, the idea that I've been able to travel and I've been able to, go around the world and see some stuff, but hopefully not lose touch with being a real human being from a small town. I hope my 12-year-old self would be pleased with that.
What is the most interesting diplomatic mission you've been on?
They've all been really interesting. I mean, the most important work I did was when I was ambassador to Madagascar and Comoros. And that's partially because of what's going on in Madagascar and Comoros and how important, helping them with development issues is. But it's also because of COVID, where there were just these historic changes and challenges. Working with the international community to fight COVID, getting people to understand it was real, it was serious, you got to wear your mask, good job. You got to get vaccinated, helping them find vaccines. That was really probably the most important work I've done. I met all sorts of people, and that was my favorite part of the job, was you really did get to meet all sorts of people. And the idea that you could, start your day meeting with the foreign affairs minister, the secretary of state, so to speak, or a governor. And then you could go to a school and talk to school kids and students and teachers. And then you could go to a farm to see some of the work that was being done in terms of agriculture and sustainable agriculture, and meet with farmers through a translator, because those farmers often didn't speak English or French or Arabic. That was really cool to be able to talk to and engage with all sorts of different people. Is you meet all the other diplomats too. And so in Madagascar, I had friends and colleagues from all over the world, from India, from Italy, from France, from the United States, from other parts of Africa, from Indonesia and Japan. And that was really cool to feel like you really were part of one big global community, and how similar we all are. We might have represented very different countries, but getting to your classmate's previous question, we would be worried about, did we spend enough time with our kids this week? And is my son or daughter doing well in school? And didn't matter where you were from, you had all those same worries. Pretty good at solving some like the interpersonal issues that can sometimes come up in an office, when two people don't get along or two offices don't get along. I've been pretty successful at getting people to work together as a team or as a group. As opposed to kind of fighting it out. I think that takes a lot of good listening skills. And I think I'm a pretty okay listener, or I try to be a good listener anyway. So I hope I'm pretty good at those skills. And I think the other thing that's important that I've worked a lot at is to try to find ways to bring attention to problems that are really important. So one of your classmates asked earlier, and we talked a little bit about COVID. and working in Madagascar and in Comoros to try to get people to fight COVID. And that meant really being able to get public support for efforts and vaccination, and so building up support for efforts is something else that I'm pretty good at, I hope.
Do you think world peace is possible?
Oh yeah, we have to think world peace is possible, don't you think, Avery? We have to believe in it, right? If we don't believe it, then it won't happen. But if we believe it and we keep working at it, then I do think it's possible. And I think it's important to be really optimistic about these things, to not sort of focus on all of the difficulties and the failures, but instead to think positively and realize that, you know what, we've made some progress. And I think if we feel like that, that gives us some encouragement and some motivation, and then we can continue to work for it. But yeah, I think world peace is possible, and I think it's not going to be easy, but I think we all have to work at it.
Do you think all nations should share equal power?
So that's an interesting question, and it's hard to answer that, right? I think all nations should have a say in what goes on. I like the idea of the United Nations and what we call multilateral diplomacy, where you have lots of different countries speaking up and having a say. I think, to be realistic, not all countries will always have the same amount of influence or say. That's just, you know, the way the world is. Some countries are really small and kind of isolated. Other countries are really big and powerful and well plugged in. And so I think it's important that everybody get a chance to speak and to be heard. But I think it's not really likely that in the end of the day you'll have like one country, one vote, like we have one person, one vote in the United States. The one thing that's an interesting concept, and you guys may want to think about this, is there are a lot of countries in the world, and we say they punch above their weight, right? Using the boxing metaphor, where they may be really small or they may be poor, but they really carry a lot of weight in the UN or in international organizations because of the way they behave, because of the types of diplomats that they send overseas, because of the way they run their countries. So even if you're small, you can be mighty. And that is up to, you know, individuals or up to the country. So I think what's kind of neat to think about and important to think about is those countries that can have a really positive influence, even if they're not necessarily big or powerful or wealthy. So that's another part of your question that I think we should think about.
What do you think is the most pressing issue in the world right now?
I think the most pressing issue in the world right now are generally the global issues. But in particular, I think if you want to bring it down to a detail, would be climate change. If you look at how the Earth's climate has changed, that's something we all really need to think about, and think about really hard and really intelligently. It's urgent. When I think about how much the climate has changed just since I was in 7th grade, it's pretty amazing and pretty scary. But again, we have to be optimistic. We have to realize that we can make a change and we can see things improve and work towards that improvement. But I would have to say, I think climate change is the most important issue. I think the most famous person I've worked, well, how do you define worked with, right? So I've been very fortunate and gotten to meet a number of very famous people. Probably the most famous person that I met and in a way I worked with was President Obama and his wife, Michelle. They visited India and I got to meet them a couple of times, and I won't say I worked with him. He's the president. He was like my boss's 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 boss. But I got to work with them and I got to talk to them. And that was kind of cool. And it's kind of cool because you realize that even famous people who are really powerful are at the end of the day just normal people, and they needed their coffee breaks and they needed to, you know, take care of themselves just like everybody else. So that's probably the most famous couple that I can come up with.
Question is, have you ever been in danger due to your job?
Yeah, I've been in a couple of situations that were kind of a little bit frightening and a little bit dangerous. But you know, the United States really tries to take care of its diplomats and keep us protected and keep us safe. And so generally speaking, it's not quite as scary as one might think. But I had to get evacuated out of a city once by a military helicopter, where they, you know, the type of helicopters, the really big helicopters with the whirligigs on the front and the back, and then the back door kind of opens down so you could drive in a truck. So one of those things landed, and these two gigantic South African soldiers got out and literally picked me and my colleagues up and threw us in the back of the helicopter. And then the helicopter took off and flew away. Because a bunch of rebels had taken over the town we were staying in and didn't like foreigners, and so foreigners were in danger. So that was probably the most exciting moment I've ever had in the Foreign Service. But I never really felt like I was in any great danger.
How do you think we can resolve homelessness?
And homelessness and a lack of health care, lack of good nutrition, particularly in the United States, particularly for younger people. But around the world since COVID, it's a lot of the poorer people and a lot of old people. How do we take care of that? And I think we start at a very individual level by realizing that we're all in this together, and we all got to work together, and we all have to take care of each other. And so taking care of yourself and your family, taking care of those around you, and recognizing that these are challenges that we all have to work together to overcome is really important. I think unless we have a sense of joint responsibility and of jointly supporting each other, then it'll be hard. And that means through charities, it means through our churches or our mosques or our temples, it means working through government, local, state, national government, all of those things. We have to constantly remind everybody that we got to bring everybody along and take care of everybody. And that's the only way we'll make a difference.
What was the biggest challenge you had to overcome to get to the position we are now?
Was probably patience. You know, I think a lot of us, we want everything to happen right away. We get a great idea, we want to do it, we want to implement it. We have a plan, we want to go somewhere, we want to get there right away. And sometimes you just got to be patient. You got to, you know, go step by step and do your homework and show up and pay attendance, and then things fall into place. But learning to be patient and learning to wait and that things will happen when they're meant to happen. That was a hard lesson. I was never a very patient person, and I think I'm more patient now than I used to be.
It's climate change. So what do you think we can do to help that?
So I think just talking about it and being aware of it are super important. Don't underestimate that power, right? Of just being aware and talking. When I was in I was in fourth grade, and I remember in our health class, they showed a film that showed a set of healthy lungs, and then a set of lungs from somebody who'd smoked like 2 packs of cigarettes all his life. And believe me, you want the healthy lungs. You do not want the lungs of that smoker. It was pretty terrifying. And I went home, and both of my parents at that time smoked. And I was just like, oh, no, 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 no. I would not shut up. I was like, you have to stop. You don't know how horrible it is. And eventually I wore one of them down, but the other one smoked for a little bit longer, but eventually they both quit. And it was just, I think a lot of times students learn these things, and adults may have learned them when we were students, but we may have forgotten, or we may not focus on it. And I think when you learn about stuff like climate change or health effects of smoking and other things, you got to speak up, and you got to share that with people, with your family, with your friends, with your neighbors, with your social group. And don't underestimate that ability to sort of share information and educate people. That's how we can change the world. I think the current situation in Afghanistan is really scary and really, really sad. I have friends who work there. I'm hoping that they're out now. But it's really sad. I think There are so many amazing Afghanis who really have great hopes for their country and for their families and their friends and their people. And they've worked really hard to change things. And we see now that change does not always go in a straight line up. It goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And this is definitely a moment where things are challenging. And those people who've been working really hard to change the country are really in danger right now. And I think that's really scary and really sad. But I do think that what is the phrase that the people used to use? The arc of justice is not straight, but the arc of history is not straight, but it bends towards justice. I think that's true. The things in Afghanistan right now could make you really pessimistic, but there are a lot of people who have done a lot of things, who have freed their minds, who have developed, who have learned, and ultimately that's going to have an effect. It's not going to be a straight line of improvement, but it's going to have an effect. So I'm not totally giving up hope, and I'm not totally becoming a pessimist. But it's going to take time, and it's going to be a bouncy ride. And right now is a scary moment. But I think one has to have hope, and one has to be optimistic. When I worked in India, we did a whole lot of programs for young Afghans, particularly young Afghan girls, helping them learn English, helping them learn tech skills, helping them learn soft leadership skills, like doing things like Model UN. And oh my gosh, they were impressive. Like, wow, they were just so dedicated and worked so hard and were so smart. And I can't imagine that those people aren't in some level going to keep that intelligence and keep that optimism and keep that hope up. So we'll keep hope alive and keep our fingers crossed.
Do you think by 2030, at least 2 of the SDGs will be met?
I sure hope so. Again, I think 2 things that we've talked about earlier come into play here. One is, I think COVID has been really, really hard on meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look at some of the measurements, COVID's just made things a lot worse and a lot harder. And so fighting COVID is really important right now. But the other thing that we talked about was the importance of being optimistic. And I think despite the fact that we still haven't met the goals, and we've actually sort of backtracked in some ways, it's important to realize that there are areas where we have made progress, where the world is a safer and better and healthier place now than it used to be, in terms of the goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. In fact, if you look at the most recent report, there are areas like maternal and child health, like increasing women's participation politically and economically. There are areas where the world is doing better now. And so that's really important. And I think we should recognize that and use that to motivate us to do even better with the other goals and see how we end up.
Thank you.
What inspired you to create the UH Institute?
So I didn't create the UH Institute. I was just chosen to launch it. It was an idea from the University of Houston, where the leadership here felt that they really wanted to reinforce how global University of Houston and the city of Houston are. And so they got funding and established this Institute for Global Engagement. And I was lucky enough that they hired me to launch it and get it started. And the idea is just that Houston is an amazingly global city with links to the whole world. I mean, you guys are so lucky to get to grow up in a city like Houston, where you have such great diversity. And part of that diversity we're discovering is great food from all over the world that you can get right here in Houston. And so how do we make the University of Houston reflect that global diversity? How do we contribute to it? That's sort of why they hired me. Somebody who has had the good fortune to work and live all over the world. And so to come here and bring that global outlook to the University of Houston. And I'm super excited to talk to you all at Lanier today. And I'm really grateful to Ms. Dimitrovich to give us this chance to bring some of that globalization right there to linear. Tips for being a good leader. So you guys should discuss this amongst yourselves as well. What do you look at in a leader? When you see somebody you think is a leader, what makes you think that they're a good leader? Because different people have different opinions, right? But it's important to think about it and talk about it. For me, the key to being a leader, and hopefully a good leader, is being very transparent and very open. I think when people are secretive and they don't share what their thought process, they don't share what their goals are, they don't share why they make decisions, they just come up with these decisions. I've never really enjoyed working with people like that as leaders. I've had leaders who've come down and sort of said, you will do this way. And I've been like, why? And they said, because I'm the leader and I'm telling you to do it. Well, that's not very convincing, is it?
Yeah.
I like to be the type of leader that says, this is what we're working towards. This is the way I want to go about it, and get everybody's input. What do you all think is the best way forward? What do you all know? And use everybody's expertise. When you build a team like that, then you have much more expertise and much better insights. And so being open and being transparent to me are the most important things about being a good leader.
Okay. Also, I wanted to ask, why did you say yes to our interview?
Why did I say yes to your interview? Because this is what makes me do what I want to do. It's much more interesting to talk to students in middle school or high school or at university, and see what they're interested in. What are you thinking about? What are your concerns? What are your solutions? Rather than talk to a bunch of people who have basically had the same life experience I have. And so we've all kind of come up with our way of looking at things. And there's difference and there's diversity of opinion, but it's really important to hear new points of view and see what you all, the new generation, think are important issues. And so I was really, really honored to be given this chance to learn from you all. If I were in middle school, what question would I ask myself? I think I would try to ask myself whether I was really taking advantage of all the opportunities that I had. Like, are there things in school or things outside of school that I wanted to do, that I was doing or not doing? And was I really taking advantage of them? And then I would also ask myself, was I doing the things that I really wanted to do? Not necessarily things, and I don't know what the teachers will think of this, but don't only do the things that the teachers or your parents or want you to do, but make sure you're doing things that you really love.
Okay.
I think it's important that all of us recognize what our passions are and that we follow them. If you really love singing, then I hope you're singing. If you really love painting, then I hope you're painting. If you really love running, I hope you're running. Because sometimes we don't do those things enough, and then suddenly we find we're in college and it's too late. So I think it's important to what the Indian philosophy is, follow your passion. I think that's really important. And if you find something you're passionate about, you'll do it because you want to do it, and then you'll be really good at it.
The State Department do to help global issues such as climate change, police brutality, and stopping animal testing?
Yeah, I think the State Department and the U.S. government have a really important role to play, and that was one of the things that made it a real honor and a real pleasure to be an American diplomat. A lot of it we can do through our leadership. Your classmate asked about leadership. By bringing attention to issues, by making sure people talk about those issues, that can play a really important role. And people listen to the United States, whether they always agree with the United States or whether they like the United States, they listen to the United States and they pay attention to the United States. And so that gives us a really big responsibility to talk about important issues. So if the United States says it's important to talk about global climate change, other countries will talk about global climate change. And that is super, it's a super responsibility. But it's also a really it's an important benefit that we have as the U.S. So I think by doing that, we can really bring attention to issues. So the most controversial stuff I had to deal with was during the Iraq War under President George Bush and then President Barack Obama. We were at war in Iraq. There was a lot of terrible news stories and a lot of terrible things happened. And at the time, I was the government spokesman in Arabic. So I was on the Arabic media, Arabic language media, talking about these things. And it was very difficult and very controversial. And you know, how did it come out? Well, it's still, I mean, that's one of the things about foreign affairs is it hasn't really ended yet, has it? It hasn't, there's never really an end. So I don't know yet how it's going to work out. Condoleezza Rice, when she was the Secretary of State, once said, you look at history and you realize that something that happened 60 years ago is totally unimaginable right now. She used the example of Germany and France having been at war in World War II, but now are great allies. Things change, but things change over long time periods. You can't look day to day necessarily. You have to think in decades or centuries. And so I hope in the long run, things are working towards world peace and working at getting better. But I think the jury is still out, as they say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a lot of sexism in the State Department and in diplomacy?
Sadly, I'm going to have to say yes. I think there's still a lot of challenges to overcome in the Foreign Service, in the State Department, and in diplomacy, where people who look like me still tend to be in the majority, and that doesn't reflect our country or our world. I will say one of the things that I'm very proud about is the fact that the Foreign Service, the State Department, the US government is really making a very, very strong effort to change that. It's highlighting, look, we still have work to do when it comes to sexism or racism or discrimination. And that's one of the things actually that makes me proudest about being an American and an American diplomat overseas is we tell people we are a work in progress. We are still trying to get better. And I think it's really important that we all continue to try to get better so that we do overcome or start to overcome some of the sexism, some of the racism, some of the discrimination that does exist. And I think the vast majority of people want to fight it and want to change it and want to make it a better institution, everybody, so that nobody is left behind. That ensures actually the best outcome for everybody in the long run. So we work with the UN a lot, and particularly in Madagascar and Comoros and a lot of developing countries. The role of the UN is really, really important. And we couldn't do our job nearly as well if we didn't have partners in the UN. And so I talked earlier about COVID, for example, and the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and the UN generally were really important in helping all of us coordinate our help to Madagascar to get people vaccinated and to fight COVID. So the UN is really important. It can be really bureaucratic. It can move really slowly. And I think you all may get a feel for that over the course of the year as you do some role plays and realize how long it takes to really negotiate things with all sorts of different people. But that discussion and those negotiations and that joint effort are really super important. In that sense, Madagascar really is unique and amazing. It's a fantastic place. And it's so much of the wildlife, both the trees and the plants, but the animals as well. So much of the wildlife that exists on Madagascar only exists in Madagascar. It is endemic to Madagascar, and that's because of the geological history of Madagascar and the human history of Madagascar. And so to be able to travel around Madagascar and discover stuff like that was a huge treat and a real benefit. And
Send one message to the State Department. Someone do better.
I want to say how much I appreciate the do better. Like that's your job, right? As 7th graders and 8th graders, you got to tell us adults to do better. You got to insist that people do better. You got to insist when you get it to be 18 and you get to vote, you get to insist that people do better, hold people accountable. That's something that doesn't happen in every country in the world. It's something that happens in the United States, and it's a huge, huge blessing. So keep holding people accountable. And part of so the Institute here at the University of Houston is all about training people to think about that globally, to think about the fact that what they do has a global impact, and that what happens in the world has an impact on them, and that we're all part of that bigger global effort. It's not just about the local, but it's also about the global and the international. And we're going to do that through events and through courses and through exchange programs, and making sure that everybody gets an equal access to that. So try to make sure that it's kids who are first generation college goers, it's kids from all different diverse communities, it's kids who are studying all sorts of different topics, that everybody gets a chance to be engaged globally. That's our goal. So they would find me if they want an internship with an international company based here in Houston, if they want to travel overseas and study for a week or a semester or a year, if they want to be involved with a joint research program or a joint research project with somebody at a university in some other part of the world, if they want to go to International Education Week and eat international food and listen to international music, all those sorts of things are stuff that we'll be involved in. The tip is, like, choose your country wisely, and that, as one of your classmates said, you need to be careful, not too much work, not too complicated, but not too simple. But read, watch videos, read, learn. There's so much, like, I like to be very holistic. Listen to pop music from that country, watch a TV show or a movie from that country, read a newspaper from that country, talk to somebody from that country or who has parents or relatives from that country. Really reach out as broadly as you can, because all of that feeds into that country's policies and society and culture. So be really broad when you're doing your research. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.